Hello everyone, and welcome to today's TAFE Talks, which is on skills development for the clean energy economy. My name is Lyndall Manson, and I'm the Director of Governance, Policy and Projects at TDA, and I'll be the facilitator for today's TAFE Talks. I would like to begin today's session by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we meet today, all around Australia. I'm in Melbourne, which is on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to any First Nations peoples who are joining us today. If you would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which you're currently on, please feel free to do so in the chat. So today we are very lucky to be joined by 4 speakers who will be discussing skills development in the clean energy economy. TDA is very pleased to introduce Eleanor Newby, who is the Director of the Clean Energy Capacity Study at Jobs and Skills Australia. The Australian Government has asked Jobs and Skills Australia to carry out a capacity study on the workforce needs for Australia's transition to a clean energy economy and zero net emissions by 2050. And Eleanor will be sharing a bit more about that work with us. I would also like to introduce our other speakers for today, who will give you a sense of the vital role that TAFEs are playing in partnership with industry in skilling the clean energy workforce. I would like to introduce Ross Digby, who is the Associate Director at the Centre for Energy and Infrastructure at Holmesglen Institute in Victoria. Welcome, Ross. We're also joined by Shawn O'Sullivan, who is the Emerging Industries Business Development Manager in Executive Services at TAFE Queensland. Welcome to Shawn. And finally, Bill Mundy, who is the Associate Director of Partnerships and Growth at Federation University. In terms of the format for today, we will hear from all of our speakers first, and then we'll open up the floor at the end for questions from our participants. So if you do have any questions for our speakers today, it would be appreciated if you could put them in the Q&A box rather than in the chat. It just makes it easier for us to keep track of them when we do the Q&A session at the end. And just so everyone is aware, today's session is being recorded, and both the recording and the slides used by our presenters today will be made available to everyone who registered for this TAFE Talks and will also be put up on the TDA website. So I'd now like to hand over to our first presenter for today, Eleanor Newby from Jobs and Skills Australia. Over to you, Eleanor.
Thank you very much. Yes, so hopefully everyone can see the slides that we've got there. So yes, my name's Eleanor Newby, and I am the Director of the group of people who are delivering the Clean Energy Workforce Capacity Study this year. So I'll go to the first slide. So the first slide is basically a bit of background about Jobs and Skills Australia. Some of you may have seen this slide many times before, but I think it's an important slide to really start with, because it kind of gives a sense of what is it that we're actually doing and why what we're doing with this Clean Energy Capacity Study is something that's quite new. So Jobs and Skills Australia commenced last year, at the end of last year in November, and it was set up in a piece of legislation as an initial agency, with further legislation to come this year, which will turn Jobs and Skills Australia into a more formal body. So that's sort of the background of that. Many of you will be familiar with the National Skills Commission, which was responsible for providing analysis and advice on the labour market. Jobs and Skills Australia took over many of the same functions that the National Skills Commission used to do in terms of providing projections and analysis on the labour market. But there were some key differences with the introduction of Jobs and Skills Australia, including one is a change of leadership. So our interim director, Peter Dawkins, is the head of the organisation. And then the other sort of, I suppose, differences was that the legislation calls out a very specific requirement for Jobs and Skills Australia to consult extensively, and in particular to consult with unions. And this was not something that had been so much of a feature of the previous commission. And then the other sort of, I suppose, new requirement of the legislation was that the Jobs and Skills Australia would be required to develop capacity studies. So sort of in-depth studies that looked at a particular sector with emerging or growing needs. And the clean energy capacity study is the first of these studies, and there will be future studies to follow. But if you look at the slide that's on there, you can see that there are a number of functions, obviously within Jobs and Skills Australia, that are relevant to the work that you do. Interestingly, there's an independent role for Jobs and Skills Australia to provide advice on the resourcing and funding requirements for RTO to deliver accessible quality vet courses. So that's an interesting function that is taking shape. Analysis on pathways into vet and pathways between vet and higher education. Opportunities to improve employment, vet and higher education outcomes for disadvantaged cohorts. So people who have been traditionally marginalised from the labour market. And then also looking at, the adequacy of vocational education and training. So there's a lot that's happening, in this space, and will continue to happen as the organisation continues to mature. But I'm responsible for this clean energy capacity study. I think that takes me to the next slide, which is the terms of reference. So you'll obviously get these slides afterwards, so I'll try to avoid reading them to you too much, but this is effectively the scope of the study. The terms of reference for the study were published last year in December. There was an opportunity for people to provide feedback on the terms of reference, and then they were refined and formalised earlier in the year. So basically, the call for the capacity study is to answer this question of what are the impacts or the workforce needs that Australia needs to consider if we're going to decarbonise and reach a net zero by 2050. So one of the first things that we are required to do is really develop a definition for the clean energy workforce and to describe its current state for the purposes of the study. And then we need to analyse the future demand for clean energy workers and the impact on employment in high emitting sectors and other sectors undergoing transition. So, fossil fuel sectors, but then, other sectors that will be impacted by decarbonisation. And we're also looking at the supply side as well. So analysing the future supply of clean energy workers. What are the skills that they need? Where do they currently exist? What are the education, training and migration pathways? And we'll be doing this over 10, 20 and 30 years. And we'll also be thinking about different scenarios as part of that. Then we need to look at the enablers and the barriers to developing and delivering the clean energy education and training. So this is obviously an area that's really relevant to the group that are on the call. Explore opportunities and barriers for women, First Nations people, people with a disability, and Australians from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And we also have to look at the barriers and enablers for small, medium and large employers. We'll be completing a number of regional case studies and international case studies as a way of supplementing the evidence for the report. So I think an important thing to say here is that the governance for this project is really based around having a huge amount of stakeholder input. And so we have a steering group, and Ross, who's about to speak, is on the steering group. They meet regularly, and we have worked with the TAFE Directors Australia to facilitate a roundtable with TAFE practitioners in answering some of these questions. So the input and the voices of people on the ground are really important to developing the story and the narrative to the report. And so we've been very happy with the level of engagement so far. I'll move to the next slide if I can. So basically, this is sort of to capture in a nutshell the report is going to be delivered in September. And really we're trying to capture what we already know about what's happening with clean energy, and then thinking about what we need to still find out. So this slide really sort of says some of the things we already know is we know that employment needs for renewable energy and development is going to outpace employment decline in transitioning sectors. So we're not going to just be able to take the workers who are in transitioning sectors and just plonk them into clean energy. There's going to be a bigger change than that. And so we also know that there's going to be a lot of growth in certain industries, rooftop solar installation, battery shortage, transmission, construction workers. And you guys as TAFE practitioners will be on the front line of experiencing this already. We know that there are opportunities in hydrogen and critical minerals and other emerging areas, but we probably understand some of those emerging areas not as well, obviously, as sort of the rooftop solar. And we know that there are already existing pathways across renewable energy courses in VET and other accreditation options, and that jobs in communities that are dependent on fossil fuels will need to transition. So while overall the number of people who work perhaps in clean energy might not be a huge number, at the regional level, there could be really big impacts of particular communities that need to have large numbers of transition. So some of the things that we need to figure out and the report will tease out is as our policy settings around how Australia will decarbonise by 2050 become more certain, we will sort of need to understand what is the impact on transport jobs. So at the moment, there'll be a significant move to electric vehicles, and what is that going to look like in terms of the people who are currently employed in those roles. And also how energy performance will impact clean energy. So what I mean by energy performance is effectively how efficient we are in and building in efficiency. So double glazing, construction, improving the efficiency of our buildings, how that will change the demand for clean energy occupations. Also, what will be the job roles that will be required in these hydrogen, offshore wind, battery technologies? And this is obviously where both unions and TAFEs have a lot to say about what's happening with industry and some of these job roles and what are the skills that industry is looking for. And then how we can scale up education and training offerings. So, the feedback we're hearing from stakeholders is that the clean energy sort of renewable sector is still a fairly immature industry. There's education and training offering happening, but it tends to be very much focused around particular technology. Over time, this is going to have to sort of scale up, and how are we going to meet that, particularly in the context of apprenticeships, where you obviously need people working to be supervising, the apprentices. How should we think about using migration to support the sector, and sort of what do we need to do to make sure that as we expand this sector, that there's opportunities available to women, to people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds and First Nations people. So that's what the final report will sort of be looking at. So if we go to the next slide. So really where we think about this final report, we're going to be writing up sort of what the jobs and industries are that make up our clean energy workforce, thinking about these different transition scenarios and what they might look like. I could talk about that if people have got questions. Exploring how employment opportunities can be shared across regions and with employment priority cohorts, identifying the education, training and migration pathways that we should be developing, and assessing the extent to which skills needs can be met by existing workers, particularly from transitioning sectors. So it's not as if we're sort of saying that this idea of transition is simply one where education and training has to produce all of the workers. We are looking at what are the skills of people who are in transitioning sectors at the moment, how could they transition to clean energy. So it's thinking of that whole economy perspective. So we've engaged Deloitte, and Ross will know we've been working very hard to think about how to model some of these questions. So Deloitte's Access Economics is working with us, but we've been working with Treasury and DQ to model what the sort of government commitments are in terms of decarbonising and what the implications of that are on the labour market, and looking at several different scenarios. So a scenario where we transition by 2050, a scenario, an alternative scenario where we don't, maybe transition, and what that might look like. But then we're also investigating this idea, and people who've read Professor Roscano's book will know this idea of an energy superpower. And this is a scenario where Australia not only produces enough clean energy for our own domestic needs, but actually produces enough that we begin to export that. And that has an impact obviously on the workforce as well. So that will be one of the transition scenarios. We'll be looking at the results by occupation and by region. And really the goal is to identify where we're going to, under the different scenarios, where we think we're going to have gaps in terms of the skills and people needed, and where maybe in other sectors of the economy we're going to have surpluses. I've got a couple more slides, but I think I might just leave it there and see if I think maybe I'm at time. Am I, Lyndall? But yeah, happy to answer questions either offline or in the chat.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yes, you are just about at time, so very disciplined of you. Thank you. So just to quickly ask this, what are the timelines for when this report will be released?
Yes, so that's a very good question. So the terms of reference say that we will be developing a report in July. I think that's perhaps a bit ambitious. So we're working to September for the report. So the idea is that it will come out later this year, and then it will also inform some other work that's happening. I know people might know about DQ's doing some work on the National Energy Strategy. So yes, our work is in sort of looking to be in September, and we'll input into some of the other work around the skills agreement, some other government initiatives as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. It's obviously a very big but also very exciting piece of work. So we'll stay tuned. Thank you. So our next speaker for today will be Ross Digby from Holmesglen Institute. So over to you, Ross.
Thank you, Lindell. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future, and people from other nations who may be joining us today. So thank you for that. Just moving on and following on from Eleanor's great presentation there, I think the first thing we need to look at is the groupings of the workforce in terms of when we're going into pathway of the clean economy. And there essentially you have three grouping areas who are going to have a direct impact in the way they work. And as TAFE institutes, we need to consider how we prepare ourselves to deliver the skills and training for these areas. So your first area is the clean energy supply. And I think a lot of what we've been doing up until now has been focused in terms of the generation systems that we're training people to install across Australia. Also looking at the transmission systems and how we're going to move energy. We're moving from an environment where we've got power stations, many of them coal-fired, where the energy has been coming from and then distributed out across the country. We're now going to a situation where we'll have a lot more different energy generation sources. So our transmission systems and how we accommodate and train for that will need to be considered. And as part of that process, we also need to look at the management of those transmission systems, where you've got spikes and dips in the energy that's coming into and out of the system as you know, the sun comes over specific areas, or the wind, the level of wind that's coming through. That's all part of what we need to consider in the mix. So there's an area around there in terms of the management of those spikes and dips. Also then in the distribution level in our towns and cities, how we work around that, and then storage as well, how we store our energy. So that's a whole area. That's a sort of the first level. The next level is the conversion. So the work we're going to have to do with various industries around how we use the energy, and we're looking, for example, cooking, heating, ventilation and air conditioning with new systems, moving away from gas. So that's going to have an impact on what we do and what systems we bring in. Transport and distribution systems is another particular area that we need to consider, and energy and the manufacturing sector, when we're moving away from gas, oil-powered manufacturing systems to electric systems. The third area is the enabling. So this is then how we have the mechanisms around us to enable this transition to take place. So this is the clean energy enabling space. So we're looking at research and development, how we can support that, so we maximise our renewable energy conversions, etc. Education and training, how are we going to make this happen? The legal and finance mechanisms around it. Manufacturing technologies, the technologies we'll need to manufacture these systems with hydrogen, with solar, all part of what we need to look at. And the energy efficiency, maximising how we can ensure that we have the most appropriate systems for our specific environments. So not all of the occupations out there will be impacted entirely by this, but we need to consider that different occupations will be impacted at different times. And I think there's also a part of that is in terms of how we transition workers from economy or businesses and occupations which are no longer required. I think we really need to be focused on celebrating all of the skills and knowledge that they can bring to the renewable energy sector and do it and really celebrate it and work on those strengths so that they have a smooth transition across to this particular sector. Also, as TAFE institutes, there's going to be not one size fits all. Being such a massive country, how we do renewable is going to vary substantially from region to region, state to state. And we're not all going to progress at the same pace. So we need to consider our local environment and our local resources and what we have in that particular space. So that's an important thing, what we do around it. Also, we need to consider that as global warming kicks in, parts of Australia will become uninhabitable or agriculture will no longer be viable. We need to consider as TAFE institutes how we retrain those people from those regions or whether we can convert those agriculture areas into renewable energy generation areas. So again, as TAFE institutes, we need to consider what that future might hold for us and start to plan for that. And a good example of that, if anyone's interested, is the NEOM project in Saudi Arabia, a massive renewable energy project that's revitalising. They'll be looking at revitalising parts of Saudi Arabia as they transition from fossil fuels. And they're putting a huge amount into that, so well worth looking at that. Also, in terms of how we work, is to make sure that we've got the appropriate policy and standards in place, and that we can start to train to those policy guidelines and standards. And I think the Clean Energy Capability Study is a big step forward around doing that. I know there's lots of challenges, but I think into the future, it's a great opportunity for us to really revisit how we do things, how we recognise the skills of people transitioning from industries. We've never seen a transition from other industries with the fossil fuel industry coming to its end of life and moving into renewable energy. And that's something that's a great opportunity for TAFE institutes to really work with and step forward in terms of how we go to the next level. Okay. I think we also need, as part of this, just to finish up, when we're looking at, there's some underpinning skills we need to make sure that people have, and as they come through across all occupations. First of all, people need to have the skills and knowledge to understand the concept of a clean economy. I think we also need to give our workers more soft skills to undertake change management and understand why change is taking place, and start to have whole of systems approaches to the way they do their job, how they look at future jobs. They need to have a wider systems thinking approach rather than just focusing on their little part of what they do day to day. More work in digital and data analysis, risk management in the clean economy, and looking at the longer term risks in that environments. And finally, to have some more carbon and climate literacy to understand how that is going to impact. I think they're all key parts of what we need to do into the future. I'll just finish up with that point, but I think at this point we've got some great challenges ahead, but we've got some amazing opportunities as a sector to really lead the way and move us forward into the clean economy. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lyndall.
Thank you, Ross. I think both Eleanor and Ross have given us a really good sense of how broad this is. I mean, when you think of clean energy, a lot of people just think it's about solar panels. But I mean, some of the things you just mentioned there, Ross, you know, you've got your energy generation, there's conversion, enabling factors, the education and training, the legal and finance, energy efficiency, and then, of course, the whole transitions piece. So this really is, a really big and far-reaching piece of work. So thank you for that. We do have some questions coming in already, which is great. So if you do have any questions for our speakers today, please put them in the Q&A box, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So I'd now like to hand the floor over to our next speaker, which is Shawn O'Sullivan from TAFE Queensland. Over to you, Shawn.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the invite this afternoon. Following on from where Ross is going, I think what we're looking at for TAFE Queensland is how the holistic approach to, developing that workforce and transitioning the current workforce into that new energy sector. I've been in the role since December last year, got a number of different projects across the state, and I know we're working at the national level across TAFEs to try and make sure we do collaborate and actually reinforce the standardisation across Australia. So just to the next slide, please. So TAFE Queensland, again, I want to pay my respects. So acknowledge the traditional custodians throughout Australia and the continuing connection to land, waters, cultures and family of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We pay respects to their elders past, present and the future. We recognise that teaching and learning has taken place over the country for over 60,000 years. And it's a two-way learning journey that's important to be a part of our reconciliation journey. Presenting today from the Turrbal and Jagera country. So everyone else out there on the chat, acknowledging where they're from, it's really appreciated. Next slide, please. So TAFE Queensland's well placed in the clean energy sector, and currently there are a large number of renewable hydrogen production projects across Queensland, with significant investments not only just from Queensland and federal government but overseas clients in that energy and renewable sector, including, as Ross and Eleanor have said, in the hydrogen exports and electrical distribution. Spread of campuses for TAFE Queensland is crucial to be able to support that workforce transition. So we're setting up ourselves to try and make sure that we've got access and equity for anyone in the industry to be able to get access to that training and then develop themselves to move into this new sector. To do that, we've developed a couple of different programs. So if we go to the next slide, especially around hydrogen, we've developed a couple of micro-credentials as a starting point. Through consultation with industry, we've established that it's that foundation knowledge of hydrogen, its uses, potential for safety inductions and introductions into the workplace, but also make people aware of what hydrogen is and not make them scared of it. I think there's a big fear factor that's related around hydrogen, but they don't actually understand the critical needs and uses that we can use hydrogen for. So we've developed two micro-credentials, the first one being this introduction to hydrogen, and it covers all those sorts of points: characteristics, gas properties, SCADA use, workplace health and safety and environmental. If we go to the next slide, and then we actually have a look at the hydrogen safety. So we've developed them so that there's an awareness program, and then we move into the safety aspect. So it's about the knowledge of hydrogen, it's about the knowledge of the characteristics, the production and storage uses, dangers when working on hydrogen, sustainability, energy policies, quality safety checks around hydrogen, and also working and monitoring and controlling the hydrogen. So we're building and scaffolding a learning structure that actually supports the entire workforce. Next one, please. Then we lead into the more, while the micro-credentials are non-accredited, we've now gone into the accredited programs. So working in collaboration with Central Queensland University, we've developed these 3 micro-credentials. They'll become available towards the end of the year. There's also a number of units there. I mean, I won't go through them, but it's about that transition strategy to get current workers in the workforce skilled and have the regulatory requirements covered off by national training packages. We're currently in the review of that at the moment. I just came out of a validation for one of those units, but we've got massive endorsement from industry and also support from industry to make sure we get this training right. So we've had some really good achievements out of this program at the moment, and I know other TAFEs around Australia have had very similar. So we've had teacher professional development offered by anyone that's got hydrogen available on their site, which is really encouraging to have. that's one of those things that we have to have, is the relationship with industry to get the support for professional development, and potentially, if not professional development, it's third-party agreements that allow us to train in collaboration with the industry experts and SMEs. Because while you're working around hydrogen now, you've probably got a high pay rate, and you're not going to be coming to TAFE to come and teach without having a transition strategy to get the staff in there. So that's one of the things that we probably need to work on, building those relationships with industry, but also looking at career opportunities for the people that are working in hydrogen at the moment, how we move them into the educational environment. We know there's a skill shortage for teachers. And then while we're in that sector, that's for our traditional trades. So these new technologies that are coming on, it's going to be even harder, and it's probably going to be years down the track before we start getting that type of person coming on board. Next slide, please. Again, in the hydrogen side of things, but looking at it a different model. So we're looking at the Cert 3 process plant operations, working with Arc Energy, Sunmetal, Cenex, Origin, and Harness. We're looking at contextualizing the PMA units to actually have a bit more around hydrogen to support that transition of that workforce. I think there's not going to be, like Ross said, there's not one solution, there's multiple solutions, and there's going to be different training opportunities across Australia. Collaboration across TAFEs will be really important to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel, 25 times, because every state gets a certain amount of funding. I think what we really need to do is concentrate on how do we actually either have the connections in industry. So if it's a connection in TAFE Queensland, I can hand it over to TAFE New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia. And then we have a standardized approach how we service a client and service the industry, not so much that it's a state-based program. With this one here, we're in the production pipeline at the moment, and we're looking at delivery Q4 this year, potentially in the 2024, depending upon how we go with industry engagement and support. So the next one, please. When we look at clean energy workforce, as Ross also said, it's not just manufacturing and distribution, it's actually the pipeline that goes around it. So we've really concentrated heavily in the electric vehicle and also into the hydrogen sector for electric vehicles. We've been running programs for electric vehicles since 2014, but we've now made a statewide development where we're adding it into our apprentice program for the whole state, supplying resources to the regions to be able to do this. Our key focus for this is on the Electric Vehicle Safety Act, and then also engaging with clients like the Electrical Safety Office to ensure that we're meeting their requirements, working with electricians to set out PPE requirements, and then building relationships like with Electrical Factory Outlet, who supply PPE to our HV lines people. So what we're doing is we're now working to the standard that's required by the electrical industry, not just within the automotive sector. Following on from that, we also work very closely with our OEMs, so the original equipment manufacturers, to make sure that we're not just gaining information from them, we're actually trying to upskill their workforce. And this is where we've started to establish a bit of a discussion piece around competence and compliance. So an OEM, so original equipment manufacturer, will do competence on that piece of equipment at that time in their workshop using their tools, but they don't actually relate back to the compliance, which then goes to the electric vehicle standards. So it's about that bridge in knowledge and skills, but also the compliance aspect. So for us, the engagement with industry and support from industry to get vehicles and technical information, we work back then with the OEMs to provide them the national accredited training, which then gives them OEM training, which is at the manufacturer's level, but then at the national level, they've got the units out of a national training package. So we tend to have that relationship, and it's like a trusting relationship where we're then covering ourselves to support each other moving forward. So the next one. So just a couple of the programs we've currently got running. So it is quite key to have those relationships with industry and key clients. So you can see there's a picture there of Brendan O'Connor, and on that same day we had Volvo with their brand new electric truck come out on that day. We work quite closely with Volvo, as do many other TAFEs in Australia, but we've developed these units and gotten support for funding or registration. So we've got the AUR 64 Inspect and Service Battery Electric Skill Set being delivered currently. under the fee-free TAFE. We're running that weekly, and we've got, oversubscription till about August, September this year. We've got the registration through for the electric vehicle qualification that's out with DESBIT at the moment for funding as an apprenticeship. We're also then looking at how we then bridge that into the BEV driver ops training for the transport and logistics sector as well. But again, the client relationship and relationship with industry is really important to be able to get resources and knowledge to build these products. So next slide, please. One of the other key areas that we've identified in the emerging industries projects is supplying training to first responders. Whether it's in a battery electric vehicle platform or we've now partnered with Energy Skills Queensland to build off what they've created already. So they've already got a first responder training platform developed. We're now going to use their platform and then build from that to build hydrogen as a first responder program to support emergency response, service, fire, police, ambulance and breakdown staff. It just allows that transition into that new vehicle technology, but also making sure that they've got access to that quality safety training as well. Next one, please. So hydrogen fuel cells. I know this one here is with Photon Mobility. So we've had some partnerships with Photon as they have with other TAFEs in Australia. But we've created a micro-credential around fuel cell vehicles and safety. But we're also working with some other key players like Hyzon, who we've got a relationship with, mainly because Arc Energy and Sun Metals are going to have the production plant and refueler in Townsville. So there's, I'm based in Brisbane, but in Queensland is a really broad sector that we have to cover. Some of it's light, some of it's heavy, some of it will lead into mobile plant. And that workforce development has to be able to be done across the state. So, when we're looking at technology to do these things, we're looking at how we have immersive technology and then allows the accessibility across the state without having to invest, millions of dollars in physical resources in fixed locations. So next one, please. Away from the manufacturing, production and vehicles, but, little things like energy efficiency in insulation. So we've got a program that's going to be rolling out from July this year. Apprentices coming in to do wall, floor and trusses in the construction industry. We've built a program with NAF Insulation about the correct installation of insulation to ensure that we maintain the energy efficiency rating of houses. And when they, simple things like when they cut a piece of insulation and they put it in the wall and they don't install it correctly, how that reduces the energy efficiency rating. And how, use of better products allows better thermal conductivity. We don't lose as much heat. So it's about educating early in the piece for apprentices, which is what we've done with our electrical and also in our electric vehicle programs, trying to get in early to establish the quality training and also the knowledge that we need for later on down the track. Next one, please. Currently, there's no one in Queensland that do GWO, so the Global Wind Organisation training. So we've got a teacher down at Canberra Institute going through the 4-step process to become certified in GWO training. Now, the ability for this is, especially in Queensland, because we've got a variety of different projects going on, we're then catering for that market. We're able to transition that workforce potentially from a gas or coal sector into a renewable sector. Next one, please. And this is probably just a bit of a cap off before we finish, but for us, and really my position at the moment is about an industry connector and engaging with industry to get that support. Without the support of, the people that are, up on the presentation, I don't think our delivery and our development of resources would be possible. But the key restraints, and I think this is where TDA and I think TAFE across Australia need to be supporting each other, is, to build those strong relationships, but not keep them in a state level or a TAFE level. Try and spread that relationship across the country to make sure that we cater for the whole country. That allows us to then build that current information and then build it consistently across the state. It'll give us the information then to go for subject matter experts, and then that'll give us professional development opportunities, and then transition those workforce into our TAFE teaching environment. one of the big things I think is a restraint is the purchasing of assets. We all know in this sort of environment that we might be able to buy something in 6 months down the track. It's actually going to be outdated and there's going to be new technology. So we might need to start looking at how the purchasing of capital or assets, does take place within a TAFE environment to support current technology consistently moving forward. And then that could lead into leasing options. And then the last part of it is our development and resourcing costs. We need to make sure that we're trying to support each other nationally so that we don't have those massive costs for resource development, and we can actually then work together to build, a way better product across Australia than just having, 6 or 8 products that are mid-level across different states and territories. So I think that's about it. Thank you
so much, Shawn. Thank you. Really great initiatives going on there with TAFE Queensland. A few challenges looming, skills shortages for teachers in the clean energy sector you mentioned, but also a lot of opportunities in terms of building relationships with industry, but also the collaboration across TAFEs and across state borders. So yeah, thank you for that. So our next and final speaker for today is Bill Mundy from Federation University, and Bill will be presenting on the Asia Pacific Renewable Energy Training Centre. So over to you, Bill.
Thanks very much, Lyndall, and thank you for the opportunity to present to the group today. And I come to you today from Gunai Kurnai country. My role is the Associate Director for Partnerships and Growth at Federation University, and we're one of the 4 dual sector universities that exist in Victoria. Go to the next slide, please. So Federation University, just a little bit about us. We're 150 years old effectively, and we started out of the School of Mines, founded in 1870. And we're the 3rd oldest provider of higher education in Australia. If I could just get you to go to the next slide. We're 8 years young, if you like, as Federation University. We were launched in January 2014, and we've extended our reach across a number of different campuses. Yes, next slide, please. And next one, please. So as an organisation, we have reach right across the regional Victoria effectively. So we have campuses in Horsham, a campus in Ballarat, a campus in Berwick, which is in Melbourne's southeastern suburbs, and also in Gippsland at a place called Churchill, which is where I'm coming to you from today. And we're well placed, if you like, when it comes to renewable asset or renewable energy generation, because our campus in Gippsland is ideally suited to service the burgeoning offshore wind energy sector, which will be coming up, which will be coming to life over the course of the next 10 years. And our campus in Ballarat is well positioned to take advantage of the onshore wind energy sector because it sits in one of the windiest corridors in Australia. So next slide, please. So what is the Asia Pacific Renewable Energy Training Centre? Essentially, back in 2016, we established work to do industry consultation around what was necessary as an organisation to deliver against the growing number of wind installations or wind farms that were being built around the Ballarat region at the time. And so as a consequence, we were funded to do an initial business case by the state government. And in that business case, we identified that there was about $24 million worth of escape revenue that was leaving the region purely and simply to come in and construct and maintain renewable energy assets. And that at the same time, if we did nothing about the influx of labour, that would blow out to about $80 million by 2025. Now, clearly COVID's got in the way of that, and some of those dynamics have changed, but essentially the dynamics in terms of a locally skilled and educated workforce in terms of servicing the wind energy sector currently wasn't in existence at that time. So then in 2019-20, we were able to take advantage of the Victorian Renewable Energy Auction Schemes, which enabled industry funding of around $1.8 million to come towards our organisation to fulfil our aim of servicing the wind energy sector from our Ballarat campus effectively, and then across our other campuses. What was very evident to us over the course of the work that we did is that there was little response to the wind energy sectors in terms of training needs through the business case work that we did. And that clearly, globally, when you look around the globe, there's some standard setters in terms of the Global Wind Organisation, which Shawn talked about a little earlier, and as well as an organisation called, or in Germany, called BZEE, which is essentially a not-for-profit organisation that's developed turbine technician training skills. So through industry consultation, over the course of time, we've identified 3 distinct areas that need to be satisfied. And those areas are essentially the GWO working safely at heights component, blade technician training, which can be done via GWO training as well, but we've separated out a response to that, which is more apprenticeship based, and then wind turbine technician training. And with the advent of offshore wind in Gippsland, we see engineering capability as being part of the offerings under APRETEC as well. Next slide, please. So if you think of APRETEC as umbrella, there's essentially four elements to it. There is the, if we go from the top left-hand side of the screen, there's the working safely at heights component, which is, or working safely, which is the GWO training, which is complemented with 4 national units of competency: manual handling, working at heights, fire extinguisher, and first aid. Then the next area of competence, if you like, is blade technician training. So blade repairs for the wind turbines. Now, you can do that training, if you like, as a skill set through GWO or through the GWO training, but we've chosen to effectively take a Certificate 3 of Engineering Composites and deliver that as an apprenticeship program to support the industry. Then there's wind turbine technician training, which at this stage could either be post or pre-trade electrical or mechanical fitter training. We plan to deliver globally recognised training through the BZEE, and it becomes a pathway for existing trades in the thermal industries to gain work in a renewable energy sector. And then, of course, there's the higher ed qualifications that are required, which is really engineering skills, particularly necessary as we move into offshore wind generation. And what we plan to do there is to deliver a Bachelor of Engineering Renewable Energy Technologies, which we'll do in the early part of 2024. Next slide, please. So in terms of APRETEC Stage 1, has been to effectively gain GWO qualification. We already deliver GWO basic technical training, but we intend to deliver the GWO BST, which is basic safety training, and GWO basic safety training refresher. With the money we've received from industry, we've built this 23-metre tall training tower. The training tower has a number of ladder systems in it. It has internal decks, and it has the facility to simulate exits from the rear and over the side of a working nacelle at the top platform. It's a real heights experience, so it's clearly better than just doing a heights-based training in Australia currently, which you can effectively gain by simply climbing to about a height of 2 metres. But clearly in this circumstance at 23 metres, you gain a real heights experience. Yes, there will be people rappelling off the top of it. And yes, we will definitely be doing all of our due diligence around ensuring that nobody is at risk. So the compound that you can see in the picture is where all of our delivery, or the vast majority of our delivery for renewable energy training will occur from our Ballarat campus. Next slide, please. Stage 1A of APRETEC has seen the development of the composites training. So that's the Certificate 3 of Engineering Composites. We've got a unique delivery model. The facility, or the pictures that you can see of the facility there, is in the building stage. It's now closer to completion, and we've started the effective delivery of the apprenticeship program now with one of our industry partners, Vestas, effectively. So we refitted out an existing building close to the tower. It's the world's first apprenticeship, as we understand it, for blade technicians. So our understanding is that across the globe at this stage, that the training for blade technicians takes place via a skill set. This is a world's first apprenticeship program. We've effectively tailored the MEM 3119 composites course to the role of a blade technician. It's a unique apprenticeship delivery model. We've got a lot of simulated learning tools that have been developed, and we only bring apprentices in during the off-season for their practical assessments, etc. And the rest of the delivery is done online effectively. We also see that this facility will be well suited once completed for the delivery of composites training into both the aerospace and the marine industries as well. Next slide, please. And then the final stage of APRETEC is stage 2, which will see us deliver wind turbine technician training. So it's yet to be decided at what level that will occur, but we've had a teacher recently returned from the USA, where they were sponsored by industry to undertake what's known as a BZEE training. Excuse me. And we plan now over the course of the next 2 years to develop the training materials so that we can deliver the BZEE program mapped to Australian units of competency in Australia. We're one of very few organisations in the Southern Hemisphere that has a licence to deliver the BZEE program. And we see that the training could either be post-trade for electricians or mechanical fitters, or it could potentially be a pre-trade or a certificate 2-level qualification, basically yet to be decided. So the photos that you can see on the screen are in fact actually of the partner training organisation that we partnered with in the USA. So real nacelles are used for all of the training effectively in this particular program. And then next slide, please. And then when it comes to offshore wind, which is the growth market, if you like, for the delivery of large generation assets to satisfy their transition, we see that there's an opportunity for us to deliver, if you like, an engineering program, because irrespective of where offshore wind starts, the need for trained skills will be in engineering initially, because all of the offshore wind assets that are developed will go through a feasibility process. That feasibility process will see a significant number of environmental impact assessments done, and through that assessment process, there will be engineering skills required. So the necessity to provide locally based engineering skills in Gippsland that satisfies the renewable energy sector we see as critically important. We also see that there's an opportunity for the pathway to that engineering qualification through the Certificate 4 and the Diploma of Engineering and Electrical, and we're working closely with our TAFE Gippsland partners to achieve that articulation pathway. And of course, it offers a great opportunity for the transition for thermal energy workers. And we're looking to deliver that qualification, or the bachelor qualification, from the second half of 2024. And I think I probably need to stop there, Lyndall.
Yes, thanks so much, Bill, and thanks to all of our presenters today. We do have a few minutes left, which is great because we've had some really interesting questions come in. One of the recurring themes is this issue of access and equity, and a question here from Elaine Butler, who says, history tells us that at times of transition, and especially in greenfield shifts, women don't fare well. This is especially important given the current profiles of industries in this field. So I think the question is, And I think this is to all of our speakers. What can JSA or TAFE do to ensure that the access to and outcomes from retraining and new training takes into account the need to diversify the existing transitioning workforce and ensure a more diverse workforce going forward? Essentially, the clean energy sector is an opportunity for us to get it right. So how are we going to do that? Any reflections from our speakers?
I might just offer a comment there, Lyndall, in the sense that with all of the industry partners that we're working with, the opportunity to transition workers and the necessity for diversity in the workforce into the renewable energy sector is critically important to them, and that they see the diversity of their workforce as a primary way of building capability. So I think industry will help support us to drive diversification.
Great. Any reflections from you, Eleanor, in terms of your study? And
yeah, I think sadly not sure that I have the answers. I think that some of what we know about, for example, women, who are coming into apprenticeships is that there's been, over a long period of time, not enough women coming into apprenticeships, and therefore it becomes a self-fulfilling, issue, in the sense that there aren't electricians or women who then, are available to take on the next group of apprentices. But I think you're right, Lyndall, that this is an opportunity to think about getting it right. And I think there is some evidence that the clean energy sector is open to thinking about how to do these things differently. I think probably a lot of people on the call will know that there's a lot of, every jurisdiction is looking at how we can solve these problems and increase certain participation. And we know that there's benefits of the cohorts coming together. So rather than necessarily having every single project have one female apprentice on it, having groups of 5, 6, 10, maybe on one project. And so that seems to be where the evidence is kind of going in that direction that I've noticed so far. But yes, it's a bit of a wicked problem, but something that we really need to be thinking about.
Eleanor, here's another question, probably for our TAFE speakers. How can you manage development of relevant broad-based training when technology is changing so rapidly?
I suppose that was my point of, if we're all working together, we have the ability to adapt and shift a lot faster. We all know the strains that resource development and registration of qualifications puts upon us all. Whether or not it's one state develops a single unit within a qualification to support the whole country being able to register new qualifications and transition. It's one of those challenging factors that we have to try and work around, but that was the next part of, there's resource development and then there's resourcing of capital equipment, and that changes as fast as what the resources do. So, the capital purchase, the resource development is a whole thought process that needs to be discussed about how do we then financially become more viable for TAFEs across Australia and not spend significant quantities of funding on technology that 12 months later is no longer current, and industry then outdates what we have. So
Shawn?
I just want to add a bit too. I think it's also that collaboration that Shawn and Bill have demonstrated so importantly about working with industry and having those key, strong, deep collaborations where you're thinking with the industry ahead of where we currently are, but to what we should be doing into the future, and having those collaborations and giving industry the confidence that we are producing the workers that they need to have their skills, and that they will continue to support us. So I think that's another critical part, is having those really deep, rich connections with industry. Thank you.
Ross, I think we have just about run out of time. So I will just thank again our speakers for today, Eleanor, Ross, Shawn and Bill, for your time today. It was a really rich presentations and discussion. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who tuned in for our TAFE Talks today. And we look forward to seeing you at our next TAFE Talks session. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye for now.